if that's what one of you wants to do, that, while the kids are young, you're going to stay home for 3 to 5 years, if not longer, then, what does that look like on your financial picture?
Mhm.
Making sure you're having those conversations early. And also, as that mindset shifts, or if you do have a vision shift, just discussing those together before one of you gets too bought in. And then it's like a detrimental argument in a way that could totally evolve.
Welcome to a Wiser Retirement Podcast. Are you curious about what financial conversations you should be having with your fiance before tying the knot? I'm Shawna Theriault, and today I'm joined by Michaela Dowdy. Each week, we bring you practical advice on retirement, investing, and planning for your financial future. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. Let's get started.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. No complaints today.
No complaints.
No complaints.
I'm a little bit tired because we've been working on a work project, something that's coming soon. So I worked a lot this weekend, which was a good thing.
Yeah.
It was a labor of love, but I'm just kind of tired.
Yeah, and we're all going to appreciate your labor of love so soon.
Well, and it's like, feel like I've had a part of it, and I feel like it's a small part. I mean, I guess it's maybe half, but Casey has the biggest part, but I'm like, I don't know how he's managing all that because it's been a lot for me just to do
riding it on vacation, I guess.
Oh, maybe he's been working on a vacation.
Yeah,
probably
on the island. That's why he's out of office, because he's actually working on that. Yeah,
probably. I mean, honestly, I have to say that when I've been working on it, outside of, because sometimes I try to work on it during work, but it's hard to switch gears.
Yeah.
And so I've had to actually go distance myself and go out of the house and go somewhere where it's like a different environment so I could just be creative, juices flowing and stuff like that. So,
it's all of the exciting, like the different scenery, have a little retreat,
a change of pace. But and we're being vague on purpose. So it's coming soon. So you'll hear more about it. But it's definitely been a lot of work. So, but it's been very exciting. It'll be good.
No, it'll be great. We're all excited about it here at the office because it'll be exciting.
Yeah,
to see it.
Absolutely. And maybe we'll have more. So that'll be exciting too.
There you go. Very true. Very true.
Well, so tying the knot. And so, finances is one of those things in marriage that causes a lot of problems and can really cause a lot of fighting. Separation can be one of those things. It's one of the hard parts of marriage, right? So
definitely.
Yeah. And so today we're going to just talk about maybe what to consider and talk about before tying the knot.
Of course.
Because you find these things out after. It's,
yes.
You can't change it. I guess you could. You'd always get
definitely
divorced,
could,
but then that's what happens, and we don't want that.
Nobody wants that.
No.
No.
So talking about it before is really important.
It is. And it's huge to have these conversations before you even. I am also one of the proponents of maybe even before they're a fiance, starting to have some conversation, not fully as in depth as we're going to go today.
Right.
But just having a little bit of I feel like you can get a pretty good sense of someone to a degree, and just kind of bringing it up here and there of hey, how do you think about this? Or how, what was this like when you were growing up?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff, where then you're able to kind of figure those things out before there's even a ring on the finger. Because I think even sometimes for a lot of people, we do wait to have these premarital counseling, things that everyone kind of walks through of ask all these questions. But I feel like there's a lot of, stress. Once you have the ring on the finger, it can feel like you're kind of there. And,
That's true. It's like you've already walked down the path a little bit. And you're like, this would look weird or feel weird. And,
yes.
Absolutely. I think that's part of it. I mean, the biggest thing is, I think just understanding how finances is a lot of habits. It's a lot of how were you raised? What were your family like? And that doesn't necessarily mean that's how you are, but our habits are created, health and wealth. It's like your habits are created a lot from when you were little.
Yeah.
And so and that doesn't mean you want to stay there. Some people change their habits because they want to be different than their parents were, or they don't like something. So really understanding, how do they feel? What is the mindset about it? Because that's really going to drive a lot of the decisions. Because even when you're first starting in a marriage, you may be relatively young if it's your first marriage, and maybe you don't really know how you feel about, some of these things we learn over time as we get older and we experience things. And it's like, oh, I didn't realize this is what it really was, And so you may not know, but it's still a mindset.
Yes, it is. And it is something that you want to and I think somehow on my like drive into work today, this was just a thought that came to my mind.
Yeah.
Of even talking through like having a financial conversation can be so daunting for so many people. And especially when you're talking about with someone like that you love and you care about. And it can, I think a lot of times because we talk about so many divorces, a leading cause is finances. So it can feel like this really big stress point of division. And I think while it's also this point of division, it's important to know it can also be a very big point of connection for like you and your partner. And like, that was just something I was like, like it's such a like important reminder to us that, you can have, while it is and can be a stressful conversation for some people, or it can eventually lead to stress down the line. Just if you're not like compatible in the way that you're seeking finances, you haven't had enough conversation, that kind of thing. It can also though be the opposite where it's like a point of connection for the both of you.
Sure.
And it's something that you can really, as you're kind of talking about, where it's like those mindsets, if you understand each other's mindsets of, oh, well, you were raised in this environment and now, maybe it was, oh, your parents took out a lot of debt and it made it to where you were in like this scarcity mindset as a child. So now you're really focused on security and really focused on saving. And your partner might grew up in an opposite environment. And it's like, well, how do you marry those two mindsets?
Right.
And it's like, but it also helps you understand and get to love that person better. And I think that that's where like these conversations can really come into play of really having that. It doesn't have to be this big daunting conversation. Like, yes, it's a huge part of your life, but it's also just understanding that's a point where you both just kind of get to come together in that. But I mean, back to mindsets overall, it's just really helping you understand each other. And I actually at one point, I was at a conference and they gave out a card game. And it was so fascinating because it has all these different cards. And I wish I brought them today. It would have been helpful since we do a video recording. But I didn't. Because I was like, it doesn't matter. It's a podcast.
We could have played a game.
Yeah. But it's so interesting because what it is just these little cards. And it just is like, I agree with this. I don't agree with this. Or I strongly agree, disagree, those kinds of things. Very like personality based. But then when you flip the card over, it has different like mindsets on them.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, I'm a security person, or I'm, an emotional spender, or I'm, grew up in this kind of an environment. And it's so fascinating because it's a lot of those questions we don't know how to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of like introspection, I guess, in a way of like, what even is my money mindset?
Right, because you don't even know. Right. And sometimes you don't know until, maybe you start off on a path and you start doing what your parents did. Maybe you are starting to get a lot of debt, or you're, instant gratification world where you're like, I want to buy it now, pay for it later, like those kind of mindsets. Or then you have the super saver. So you may not know until you start working and you're further along in your career and you're coming across obstacles and things, and you may not know until later.
Yeah.
And so figuring out what does that even mean, I think that's important too, and having those conversations. Because and we could start off similar together because we think, oh, that's reasonable, but then you really feel one way or the other when it really comes to pass. And that's maybe where the division happens too, where you start thinking differently. And always remember to try to, meet each other in the middle. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle, and just having an open mindset and dialogue with your spouse, and patience and, understanding with each other both ways, because maybe one who spends a lot and one who saves a lot. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It could be, but if you can find a way to meet in the middle, then maybe this person who saves a lot could have a little more lenience and a little more less restriction, or feel less restrictive. Whereas the person who feels like they spend a lot, maybe like, okay, I can learn how to save more, and you can meet in the middle, Unfortunately, it doesn't happen that way a lot though.
I know.
From what we've seen. It's usually, either they're in tandem or they're opposite tandems, and the opposite tandems. Sometimes those are really hard conversations,
Yes. And I feel like that's even kind of where you lead towards, and I know we're going to get into this later, but in towards that. Are they going to be joint finances because you're equally aligned, or are you going to go completely opposite because you're not equally aligned?
Well, that's true.
And I feel like that's a leading.
Totally. We've seen people that come in here, even, not in second marriage. We see a lot with separate finances with second marriages.
Definitely.
I do. And so I'm assuming you do too. But, with first marriages, it's normally, you normally see them pulled together, but I've seen a couple that are separate. So, where it's like one has debt, maybe the other one doesn't. And so those are good conversations to have, So, going into maybe, obviously first the mindset, and then being open to that discussion and understanding what your mindset is, but then looking at discussing the income and like, what are your overall career goals? You know, what are you wanting to accomplish? What does that look like monetary? You know, what is the current income versus the future earning potential there?
No,
and
exactly.
so, you know, understanding, you know, maybe things like, do you want to go back to school? Do you want to change careers? Do you like what you're doing? You know, where does that, and sometimes that is, you may not know the answer to that either, but having the open dialogue, because the last thing you want to do is get married and be like, oh, well, I really want to go back to school and take a few years off and then go this direction. And it's like, well, wait a minute. We didn't even talk about that, because that's going to put a financial strain on the household, because you're going to not be working maybe for a little while. And now we have an expensive school, and that was never talked about.
Yes. Like, and that's a huge turn point. And I think it is something where you do just want to be honest about all of your dreams and aspirations, even if they're like kind of ambiguous and you're like, I don't even know I'm going to make this happen, or maybe it's never going to happen, but I want to let you in because you're my partner of I am tinkering with this in the back of my mind. But I think it is something too, as we're talking, where it's like talking about mindset shift, goals shift, income shifts, like all of it's going to shift. So that's why this open dialogue is so important to continue throughout marriage, regardless of having this initial conversation.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I don't even know where it's from, but you know, like they constantly talk about how it's like, oh, when you're married, you like kind of get a new spouse every few years.
You do.
And it's like, because life is happening to both of you. And like, you know, you're having that growth together, but also separately and individually, because you're individuals too. And you definitely just kind of have to figure out, okay, well, now we're totally different than we were when we were in our 20s.
Yeah.
Or, you know, okay, now we're in our 40s. It's 20 years of life here. And that is totally different than, you know, where we were when we started out in our marriage. And our mindsets are totally different, because also you're likely in a totally different income situation as well.
Probably.
So you're probably not in the like 20 scarcity, like, oh my gosh, how are we going to make ends meet kind of thought process. It's more of that, oh, you know, we're
finally doing, exactly. You're finally having the income and the good savings, and maybe the kids are starting to go off to college and those things. And so, you know, it's definitely, you know, it definitely changes over time, and having to like recheck in and stay checking in and, you know, stretching and growing together.
Yeah.
You know,
even with that though, like talking through those just visions that you have for the future though, and making sure that you are aligned in those, whether it even is like, one of you might want to be like a stay-at-home parent, you know, like we talked about on a podcast, I think, that comes out before this one.
Yeah. Yes, it does.
Okay.
A couple weeks before.
And so like we've talked earlier, you know, just having that, okay, well, if that's what one of you wants to do, that, you know, while the kids are young, you're going to stay home for 3 to 5 years, if not longer, then, you know, what does that look like on your financial picture? You know, making sure you're having those conversations early. And also, you know, as that mindset shifts, or if you do have a vision shift, just discussing those together before one of you gets too bought in. And then it's like a detrimental like argument in a way that could totally evolve.
Absolutely. No question. And then when you're, you know, I think this is one of those things when you're looking at what we're going to talk about next, maybe you should be engaged. I don't know. That's up to you all. But, you know, laying out what are your assets and what are your debts, you know, so that way you both are going into it eyes wide open. So you understand, here's my assets, here's my debts. You know, maybe you're bringing a lot of student loans to the marriage. Maybe you're bringing, you know, credit card debt, et cetera. So, you know, just understanding, and sometimes it's second marriages, and that looks totally different too, because you have had a lot of life, and maybe, you know, you've gone through a divorce and you have alimony payments or child support. And so really just having an open dialogue, like, what does it look like, and how are we both going to contribute to this, and what does this look like? But understanding, you know, the debts and the assets, I think, are really important. You know, not necessarily so, you know, I'm not saying that somebody has to, you know, have a lot of money for them. You know, obviously this is about love and long term, but wanting to understand, you know, is this something where we may struggle, you know, for a while, or we're both going to do okay? Or, you know, if there is debt, is there some sort of repayment plan, you know, that maybe you can do together? Or, you know, I've seen where some individuals are just very adamant that they brought this in and they want to take care of this debt, and they don't feel like it's right that their partner pays for it. But then I've seen the opposite, where it's like, well, no, we're a unit now, and so we'll do this together. It's our future, you know? So that is a huge conversation.
It's a huge conversation. And it is so sweet. I remember it was a couple of years ago now, being in a client meeting, and it was a couple, they'd recently gotten married, like very much newlyweds. It had been a few months, and the wife had some student loan debt. I mean, nothing crazy substantial, but like she did. And he, as the husband, was just like, yeah, we're going to tackle it together. And hers, like, as the wife, she was like, no, it is my debt. It is not his responsibility. It was just adamant. Like, he does not need to help me with this. Like, I did this. Like, this is not his responsibility. And it was just so sweet to see him love her so well and just be like, no, like, we're jointly in this together. I knew what this was before we got married.
Yeah.
Like, and we're now joined together and we're going to tackle this together. And I know that's not for everyone, but it was just like such a sweet, like, sentiment to see, like, because he was definitely the breadwinner out of their family. And it was just sweet to see him just kind of like step into that. Like, I want to provide for you. And I want to make sure that, you know, we are taking care of and putting ourselves on a good footing as we start off this marriage.
That's great.
Even if, you know, because you're educated, you have a job, like, it's like, it got you to where you needed to be. And like, it was just like really sweet to see him like love her so well through that.
And it's helping both of us in our careers and our finances.
Exactly.
Because you're, you know, that made me think of something else. You know, I've seen a couple situations where someone comes from a different background talking about, you know, what you were just saying, but also the mindset and how you were raised. And I've seen where, you know, maybe one person comes from a family that has some wealth and then maybe the other didn't. And, you know, I've seen this, and sometimes it's the psychology of money, right? It's like the historically, or, you know, not to get into male versus female or what have you, and roles, but we all have roles in our marriage, right? And so, you know, sometimes the male feels like they need to support and, you know, that kind of thing and be the protector. Yeah. But if she comes from wealth, I've seen where in that kind of situation you're saying, where he's like, I don't want you to pay for my stuff and I don't want you to do this, because they want to prove that they can take care of their spouse. And those dynamics are really hard, especially if you're coming into a marriage where, you know, the other individual's used to a certain lifestyle.
Yes.
And, you know, you feel maybe he or she doesn't feel like you have to live up to that, but maybe your perception is, I have to live up to that. Right. Yeah. And so you feel like you have to keep up with the Joneses or keep up with the family or what they've been accustomed to. And here you are coming to this where maybe you're not there, or maybe you're not even going to be there at some point, you know? Yeah. And so those are hard conversations to have too, because what does that look like?
No, exactly.
You know?
Yes. It's a huge conversation, especially I think when it is like having those kind of unspoken expectations, even if it's for yourself or it's for your partner. And it's like, if you just talk through it, like, it is something where it's like, likely your spouse is either not expecting that, or if they are, then y'all need to figure out how you're going to get on that same status level or page, or, you know, okay, well then this is how we're going to get it to where we're going to be making what your parents are making, or
whatever
it may be,
lifestyle,
you know, and that's where, you know, you do have to kind of find those balances, but it is just so much about having the conversation and having an open dialogue. And so, you know, not getting kind of caught up in your own like spiral as a person of like, oh my gosh, they want this, they need this, da, da, da. And it's like, did they ever actually tell you that?
Right.
Like,
right.
You know, like
the assumptions we make, we're our own worst critics sometimes. And the assumptions we make and the dialogues we have in our heads may not even be real.
Yes.
Right.
No,
so
exactly.
It's very important to just, you know.
And it's huge, especially going into a conversation like this, to not have those where it's like, oh, well, I know that they want this, this, and this, and like, I can't provide this, this, and this right now. And so that means that this is not going to be a good conversation. And it's like, no, you have to go in expecting a great conversation. You have to also go in like very open-minded with each other, because you honestly don't know what the other person is going to view like. And
sure, I've seen where it's like, you know, I don't want all that stuffiness that I was raised in. I just want to have feel like I have a, you know, whatever, a normal life. I mean, it's all normal, but you know what I mean? Where it's like, I don't really want that. It doesn't matter to me. It's just stuff. So, you know, understanding how they feel about those things. So I think that's great.
A huge difference too. But definitely having that conversation. I feel like we keep going off on these little like emotional rabbit holes.
But it is emotional though. That's so the thing. Emotional. People are so emotional about their money, and they're like, it is. That's the thing.
Yes.
It's like, it's black and white and it's on paper, but it's not, you know, it causes a lot of friction. Yes. And I'm proud of that couple for being newlyweds and coming in and doing planning.
Yes.
you know,
it is huge.
A lot of them don't start doing planning as newlyweds. They wait till later because they don't feel like I don't have enough money to do planning or whatever. But you have to start planning early.
Yeah.
You know, so that you have money.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's also just to not have like, you have a game plan and just have someone that can come alongside you and just be like rooting for you and your marriage.
Absolutely.
And, you know, as you do tackle difficult conversations, especially because I feel like Shawna, you speak to this more so than even me, of just like having, you know, kids come into the mix and that changes everything as far as, you know, finances. And we talk about that, I feel like, so frequently.
Oh, I know. But, and that's like aligning on financial goals. It's like, you don't know what kind of parents you're going to be. You think you might have a vision of what kind of parents you might be. It could be based on how you were raised. It could be based on what you don't want to be and how you were raised. It could just be, you know, you have this picture in your head, and anything we picture in our head never ends up the same way. You know, it's like before I had kids, I'm like, I would never make a separate meal for them. I would never let my kids sleep in the bed. Well, I might if I'm tired and it's survival mode when you have littles and you're exhausted from working all day. I might. I've eaten crow so many times since having children. It's not even funny. But, you know, that is a good point as far as making sure like your goals are aligned and what you envision, especially with children.
Yeah.
You know, do you picture private school or public school? Maybe you were raised in private school, and so you really want your kids to go to Christian private school or something. And it's like, well, that's a whole different financial status, you know, when you're paying like basically college expenses every year for like their whole, you know, that's a completely different thing. Or, you know, understanding if you're on board with, well, I want to pay 100% of their college, or, you know, maybe we give them a partial amount, or, you know, I think it's good for kids to have student loans. You know, you may have different viewpoints on that. I've seen some parents like, we're not paying for college. And I've seen some parents are like, I will do anything to pay for my kids' college, even if it means that I have a less of a retirement. Yeah. You know, those are two different mindsets. Yes. And sometimes you don't know what kind of parent you're going to be until you're in the situation, which is hard. And so, but going into it, maybe having those conversations in the beginning, you know, are you all about the kids doing travel sports and spending tens of thousands of dollars a year to do like cheerleading or, you know, whatever, or travel baseball or horses, you know, Casey's daughter does horses. So it's like, you know, are you okay with those things and investing that? Or do you see that as frivolous? Yes. Like, why would I ever spend that? You know? So it's really interesting just having those conversations about college. And sometimes you don't know when you're first in a marriage, but I've seen sometimes with second marriages where you're just maybe you're a little bit older. Maybe you have been through, you know, some discussions with a previous spouse and you're trying to be, you know, different this time. And, or maybe you're not the one that needs to be different or wants to be different, but you know, and having those conversations up front, I see that more, those kind of more deeper conversations in, you know, later marriages or second marriages, just because you've had some life happen to you and you have a little more knowledge, you know, a little more experience in those things. And you've kind of seen a little bit more, you know, versus if you're getting married in your 20s and you've never been a parent, it's kind of hard to like, you know, picture what does that look like or what is that, you know, but some may already have strong points on that.
Quick check-in. Have you thought about the legacy you'll leave behind? Download 7 Steps to Leave a Financial Legacy, a free guide from Wiser Wealth Management to learn more. It's not just about wealth. It's about leaving a lasting impact. Go to wiserinvestor.com/guides to download your free guide today. Now let's jump back into the episode. No, and I think it is something like kind of, I mean, how you're saying too, where it's just like, it shifts over time. Yeah. And it is, you know, figuring out like, and knowing and giving space to your partner when that does happen or when it could happen. And then figuring out, okay, well, where do we want to come back to this point? If one of us has shifted, how do we, you know, now navigate this of, okay, well, at one point you really, you know, wanted the kids to be in this travel sport. And now you're like, no, I don't. Right. Like, why? Like what's changed? Or, oh, at one point it was, we were going to fully fund college. And now it's like, you know, maybe that kid needs a student loan. You know, like,
well, that's a fair point. Because sometimes you meet your children and they turn out to be a certain personality. It's like, well, they need to learn a little more responsibility, so maybe they need to take out a little bit of loan so that they would learn how to pay it back, So, and children are all different too. Yes. They can be raised in the same home and they're totally different.
Oh, 100%. And you have to like parent them differently.
You do. And then it's not fair. And it's like, well, life is not fair. Let me tell you, I'll be the first one to tell you life's not fair, honey. So,
it's so funny.
Those conversations are really, really hard. Another one on financial goals. It's like, do you want to retire early? What do you envision with that? And sometimes it's hard to even think about retirement when you're that young, and thinking about things like aging parents or helping with that. And again, I feel like some of these conversations happen later, but if you have the overall feel of how, if you know that one of their parents may be ill and they're going to be taking care of them one day, how do you feel about that? Those kind of conversations.
100%.
Yeah. And sometimes, again, we don't know if they're younger.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also something too, where it's like, even like, I hate to be the person that's like taking your birth order into account a little bit of like, or, where you're at, where it's like, okay, for the eldest daughter, typically you're the one that's going to be in charge of your parental care, statistically speaking. Right. Not saying that's always,
right,
but typically speaking, that's kind of how it happens. And then even, especially if you're like an only child, it's like, of course that's going to fall on you. And so, there's no one else really there for that. So that's where, I do think that that's like a huge conversation to have, because a lot of times that can determine location where you need to be in the future. Financially, how are we going to provide if our parents are not, in a great financial footing? Like if we're the ones that are better off in the sense of, we still have income coming in because we're still working, like how much are we giving to, or, supporting them? Or what is even the balance I've seen with siblings, other siblings? Like maybe you're the primary caretaker, or the primary contact for your parent or whomever for like their health and wealth and all of that. But then it's like, well, how do the other siblings then, or like what is that management? Because then I feel like that causes a lot of tension with spouses.
Right.
Because it's like your spouse can be like, well, I don't know why we're having to foot this bill when you have 3 or 4 other siblings over here that could also be supporting this, because it's also their parent too. And it's like, then it gets into the family dynamics and it just snowballs.
Well, it's true, because you're marrying into the family, right? Yes. So it's kind of like you're marrying into that. And so you have to understand those dynamics.
But it's so important though, to have those kind of conversations before it becomes that emotional snowball though.
Yeah.
And to like, be like, well, we did talk about, at one point we were really thinking this.
Yeah.
When we were both still level-headed. We weren't thinking about all of these emotional, that does pull in, because you do start, especially if it's like a health decline, it starts to be like a grief. You're starting to go through grief in a very small form. And like, you want to make sure that you're, taking that into account, but you do want to have those conversations ahead of time. So then you can be like, well, this is what I said when I wasn't upset, or when I wasn't angry, or I wasn't, frustrated with how things are going, or just exhausted.
Right.
And so I think it is like kind of what you're saying, but it can be difficult to find out, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And how do you find that balance? Especially if you're not in that situation yet. Completely. Because it totally shifts just depending on the situation as well. And you never know.
No. And then things change over time. Like we said, something that wasn't there could end up being there, and then you make decisions at the time. You just don't know, that's where there's always going to be something. Yes. There's always going to be something thrown at you. And it's like, that's where you just have to navigate together.
Yeah.
Also creating a joint budget would be good. Just talking about budgeting. We've seen couples that do it separately. We've seen couples that do it together. Most couples do it together.
Yes.
I would say the majority. I've seen in second marriages, maybe keeping the budget separate, or maybe there is debt and stuff, but most of the time they do it together, because being on the same page with the budget and just making sure that we agree with what we're spending and all of this, I think that can keep not really a checks and balances, but really just keep everyone on the same page.
Yes.
And we're not overspending or, under saving and all of those things.
Exactly.
So we can meet our long-term goals.
And I think it's just a little bit of that like accountability mindset. And it's not like, and I feel like the accountability word is like a kind of a tough word, I think, in some ways. It's like, I don't want my husband to tell me what I can and cannot buy. It's my money too. And it's like, or, the other way around. I don't want my wife to tell me what I can and cannot buy. I don't want her to, stereotypically nag me about it, like that kind of thing. And it's like, that's not really the case of what it should be. Of course, like that's a conversation that comes into play, but it really should be we have this goal, we have this vision for ourselves. And hey, if we're like frivolously spending on all these other things that do not align with that goal, then maybe we do need to come back to the table and say, okay, have our priorities shifted, or do we need to recenter ourselves towards our goal?
Yeah.
And like, I think that's really kind of more so what it kind of outlines, or it's even like talking through that mindset. Like, I know I'm an emotional spender. Like, if I'm like going through the trenches, I'm going to be a person who's like, I think I need a little treat, like I want to go buy that new shirt, like whatever it may be. But it's like, okay, if my partner's loving me well and he starts, seeing like, okay, she's going and spending this, and this like every day.
Yeah.
She's getting a little treat.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I just need to check in, not to say, hey, I see you're spending, but just say, hey, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Hey, like, I just want to check in, make sure everything's going well. Is there anything I can support you with?
Yeah.
And it's like, that opens that dialogue of like, because you as a partner understand this is how my person gets, you can now check in with them, not in a way that's like demeaning their financial spending. We don't want to do that. That causes ridiculousness that doesn't need to happen.
Especially when you're, an advisor that, is built their own career and all that. So,
yeah. So it's just one of those where it's like, okay, no, but like, I am noticing this out of you because that's just, something that you do. But it's like, no, like, let me just check in and see how it's going and see how life is happening and like make sure that there's not a way I could be supporting my partner better. And it's just having that kind of a view of finances and that can kind of help you understand your partner, even in the opposite, where it's like, maybe they're like really squirreling away money and you're like, what are you stressed about? Like, why are you so stressed about finances? Like, just like wanting to hold it all right now. Like, why are we hoarding cash? Like, and, being really picky about spending. Like, what is going on?
That made me think about like different investment styles too.
Yeah.
Like, what if somebody's like really conservative and the other one's like, no, we should, buy everything in gold or something or crypto, it's like everything double down.
Yeah.
That's a huge discussion to have. And again, you may not know what that is, but if you've already started investing, just understanding the difference is investing.
Yeah.
Because I've seen that too, where it's like this person's ultra conservative and this one is, not at all. And so that's really hard. It's like, I want $50,000 in the bank at all times. And it's like, well, that's too much cash to have. We don't need to have all that. This is not a doomsday scenario,
Yeah.
So it just depends on, how you feel about that as well.
Oh, 100%.
And then another important things to talk about is talking about your taxes. Taxes will change. Filing together is typically better when you're married, just because there's a lot of tax breaks there. But understanding, make sure there's no tax liens on the other person, and understanding that they paid their taxes and all of that. Going back to like the debt discussion. And then, talk about the taxes and how that's going to change, maybe run tax projections together, especially your first year of marriage, and ongoing, just to make sure everything's still in alignment, and insurance and beneficiaries as well. So, health insurance, life insurance, looking at beneficiaries, are you going to switch beneficiaries after you get married? Or is this a situation where this is where some of the hard conversations could come in, where maybe it is a second marriage and you have children from a previous marriage. And, how do we want that to go if something were to happen with the life insurance and the beneficiaries of the accounts? So those are really hard conversations to have. And I think they're important to have beforehand with a trusted advisor, just because estate planning can be really complex. And talking about beneficiaries and all of that, I think that's a conversation that needs to be had with an estate planning attorney or financial advisor, just to look at everything and just understand. Because, on one hand, you don't want to leave necessarily your spouse without the means to live, if something were to happen to you. But at the same time, you may not want to just leave everything to your spouse and maybe disinherit your children, so having that set up properly and just discuss it together before getting married, I think is very important, because that could be a huge surprise later and cause, some friction there too.
No, and you definitely want to be on the same page, because it's something that you two, like, whether it's, I'm happy to put you as a beneficiary, the first week of our marriage, or no, we're going to wait, like whatever it may be, but also figuring out, just like what you're saying, like, if there are different complex relationship dynamics there, you want to make sure you're taking those into account as a team and as a unit now, instead of, having really that surprise later. Because maybe it is that if your spouse is like, oh yeah, they got all this like life insurance, all these things, but it's like all of it's actually going to like your children or, those are the beneficiaries. And it's like, actually, like, no, your spouse then needs to be, having provisions for themselves put in place, or we need to talk about what their provisions are. And so that's definitely a huge conversation to have that can feel a little, tiptoe a little bit of, how do we manage this and how do we protect one another? Because I'm sure if you're getting married, you likely love each other. So we hope. And so
that's the goal.
Yeah. So at that point, you want to make sure that you likely are wanting to take care of each other and make sure that you are taking care of, even if it is a second marriage. But, what does that balance look like?
Or if there's like a prenup and, we did a whole show about that as well.
Yes.
So understanding all that and the assets and, not commingling or commingling, understanding all those. But even if it's not a second marriage, sometimes there is inheritance from like your parents or maybe they're gifting to you and they don't want you to commingle it. I mean, most of the times the parents would put that in like a trust for the child usually, or the adult, potentially, but not always. I mean, they could be just gifting, to them over time and definitely keeping that separate if that's the wishes of the parents or, the grown child. So understanding those dynamics as well. Planning for emergencies, again, this is like the doomsday thing again, but always have an emergency fund. We talk about that in planning, always have an emergency fund, but just planning on emergencies, how much to save, how much to keep aside, where to put it, talk about high yield savings potentially for your emergency fund. Should we have 3 to 6 months? Understand if you're saving for something like maybe you're coming together in a marriage and you're buying a house together. Or maybe you're selling a house and buying another one because one already has one, or turning one to a rental property. So having those discussions on, emergency savings, what to do in the event of emergency or how they would handle it. And then the house situation as well. I think that's really good discussions to have.
No, that's huge. And even like for that planning for emergencies, even, making sure like figuring out, I think for that savings is, what kind of savers are you? Because I think there are people that also approach, there's saving first dollar of every, paycheck is going to go towards this. Like that first portion, first of the month, everything's going here. And then whatever's left over is what I have to spend. And there's the other mindset that it's, okay, well, I'm going to get my paycheck, pay my bills, do my spending, then I'm going to save what's left.
Right.
And like, it's, finding and meshing those two personalities sometimes as well, that can be a little difficult, and figuring out, well, what kind of savers are you even when you are, trying to plan, whether that be for emergencies or just building your investments overall. What does that look like?
And then even charitable donations and
Yes.
savings or tithing, if you do that, all of that.
Making sure you're aligned there is huge.
Right.
And even something that I kind of thought of as far as going through the budget before we jump to other things here is making sure too, I think this is a pinpoint I've seen, is just having, when you're having those kind of conversations of, well, what is, each person's mindset and viewpoint, and not trying to cause tension, especially if you're doing joint finances, is a little bit, especially early on, is figuring out, okay, well, what amount of an expense is okay to have without consulting your partner?
Oh, that's fair.
Because I think there's a difference there where it's like, especially if you're someone that grew up in like a wealthier family, it could be like, oh, I saw my mom spend $1,000 and not bat an eyelash.
Right.
Not even think about calling my dad. Or, you could be the other way where it was like, no, like, my dad wouldn't spend, $20 without calling my mom,
Right.
Just like different things where it's like,
That's a good point.
where does that, point come into where it's like, hey, like, I need a phone call if you're going to spend this amount because we have a goal here and we need to make sure we're aligned.
Yeah.
Or, something like that, where it's just like you at least have that kind of discussion to know like, oh, I'm going to go buy a vacuum cleaner and I'm going to spend, I don't know how expensive vacuum cleaners are. I haven't bought
Couple
one
hundred, maybe.
Yeah, a couple hundred, I don't know. But,
Depends.
Depends. But, it's like those kinds of things of like, oh, I need to go buy this for the house and like, this is how much it's going to be. And it's like, well, do I need to discuss that with my partner or just go buy it? And I think that's like a big thing where
setting
those expectations, because it's like we're saying, if you have unspoken expectations, it leads to those problems. So.
No, that's a great point. And not necessarily asking for permission, but just to set expectations. And that's why I love when we're doing planning, we set that family mission statement, and that can change over time. It's like, really, it's, what is your family mission statement, and, what are your family goals? So that way, you can help each other, right? It's a partnership. So it's like, okay, to your point, you have these goals you're trying to meet. Is what we're about to do and our actions align with our goals.
Yeah.
And so that helps the discussion there too, because you can just pull it back to what you both agreed to or what your vision is. So, maybe in your example, if you're giving yourself a treat, it can be like, well, wait a minute, we have these goals and is it really worth it to you? And maybe that changes your habits over time because you're like, oh, it makes you think. And then it's like, well, maybe that instant gratification isn't really serving me because then I just end up with this stuff that I don't really need. I don't know. I'm not trying to.
No. I see what you're saying.
Michaela, come on now. You
exactly.
You end up with these things you don't really need. And it's like, well, here's the goal. And this isn't getting you to the goal. It made you happy for a second, but long term, it really didn't.
Yes.
Right?
No, exactly. Well, it's that short term versus long term.
That's so difficult. Right now.
No, just for me. Yeah, guys, this is actually for me.
We're worried about her spending.
It's actually my intervention. No, I'm kidding.
I love it. You have to be aligned with what you're training. So you're teaching people to be disciplined. So we have to be disciplined, right?
Yes,
you have to lead by example. And I know you do. I'm only teasing.
No. Yes. No, 100%. But I'm so guilty of the little I'm going to go get this little $10 coffee.
Well, that's it. It's the $20. It adds up to 100, which eventually adds up to 1,000, which eventually adds up, it's like you could have invested that.
Yes.
In S&P 500 and be really further along.
You really could.
Yeah.
I know. And it's those little steps, especially early on, in your marriage, just making those, if, first marriage, you're really young, whatever it may be, making those little intentional steps really can get you so far ahead.
Absolutely.
And they might seem minuscule now, but they actually do mean a lot.
It'll serve you well in the long run, for sure. And you're setting up those habits for yourself, for your household, but then maybe your children in the future as well. Because again, like we said, a lot of times you learn your habits when you're little and it's just ingrained in you and it's not intentional. It's just whatever you're exposed to. And so if you have good habits, then hopefully, it doesn't mean always, but maybe your children will have good habits too, and it'll just carry on.
Exactly.
So,
No, definitely.
So I wanted to just go through a couple of podcasts. I think we already mentioned a little bit here. Episode 233, How Second Marriages and Blended Families Impact Estate Planning. We mentioned that a little bit, but that's a good episode. Episode 230, What Can and Can't Be Included in a Prenup. Episode 183, How to Avoid Financial Conflict in Marriage. That would be a great one. And we also have a video in the show notes, the financial pros and cons of marriage. That would be great to watch. So if you need a financial check-in before tying the knot, please feel free to reach out to us to schedule a consultation with our team to create a financial roadmap, tell it to your life together. We do enjoy doing that. We look at anything from budgeting and debt management to joint goal setting, the family mission statement and long-term planning, and we'll help you start your marriage on a confident financial footing. So please reach out to us.
And also just know that I just met with a client who was a sweet couple and they were pre-engagement or right at engagement, had just gotten engaged and aren't really even tying the knot till I think August 2026.
Yeah.
But they wanted to just go through the process and make sure because they had just purchased a home together. But they're our finances are becoming joint before technically we're tying the knot. So we just want to, make sure that we're on the right footing. And that is so huge. And know that, if you're wanting to, even before, especially you're tying the knot, then of course, we are here to help and build that financial plan for you guys to make sure you do start off strong because this is a huge proponent of your life and your overall marriage as a whole and the health and wealth of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great. That's so helpful. Well, thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in learning more about Wiser Wealth Management or want to schedule a consultation to meet with one of our fiduciary financial advisors, you can do so by going to wiserinvestor.com or clicking the link in the episode notes. We will see you next week.
Yes.